Grotty and the Quarryman, to Paul Sykes, author of Sweet Agony. He demolished 5 doors at a sitting and topped it off with an outside window one Christmas afternoon when drunk. Sober, he smiled like an angel, bowed, kissed ladies' hands, and courtesy was his middle name. She tried to pass for 30 at 56, called him my sweet piglet, and laid out dainty doilies for his tea-time treats. Always she wore black from toe to top, and especially underneath. Her hair dyed black, stuck up in a bun, her lipstick caked and smeared, drawling from the corner of her mouth like a 30s gangster's moll, her true ambition. "Kill him! Kill him, the bastard!" she'd scream as all Wakefield watched. "It's Grotty! Grotty's at it again!" as pubs and clubs banned them, singly or together, and they moved lodgings yet again, landlords and landladies left reeling behind broken doors, blood-smeared walls covered with a shiny patina of carefully applied deceits. It was the cats, the kids, them druggies, lads from football, anyone, anywhere, but him and her. Once I heard them fight. "Barry, Barry, get the police," she thumped my door, double 5-lever mortise locked against them. "Call police, he's murdering me." I went and calmed her down, pathetic in black underwear, and he, suddenly sober, sorry, muttering, "Elaine, Elaine, it were only fun. Give me a kiss, just one." Was this her 4th or 5th husband? I'd lost count, and so had she. Each one, she said, was worse than the last. They'd all pulled her down. One put her through a Dorothy Perkins plate-glass window in Wakefield's midnight, leaving her strewn amongst the furs and bridal gowns, blood everywhere, such perfection of evidence they nearly let her bleed to death, getting all the photographs. Rumour flew and grew around her. Finally they said it was all in a book one husband wrote in prison, how she'd had a great house, been a brothel madam, had servants even. For years I chased that book. Lynch, they told me, it's by Paul Lynch, but it wasn't. Then finally, I remember Sykes. They always called him Sykesy. And so it was. Sweet Agony, written in prison by one Paul Sykes, her most famous inamorato, amateur boxing champion of all England, 20 years inside, fly pitcher supreme, king of spielers. How she hated you for beating her, getting it all down on paper, even making money for doing it. That bastard cheated me, writing lying filth about me, and I never saw a penny, she'd mutter side-mouth to her pals. But that book, that bloody book, was no pub myth. It even won an Arthur Koestler Literary Award, and is compulsive reading. Hardly as a poet my cup of tea. But I couldn't put it down. Paul Sykes, I salute you, immortaliser of Elaine. Your book became and is my sweetest pain. And now I'd like to read one of the very few poems I've written about my great passion in life, psychoanalysis, and it's called From the Analyst Couch, and it's about a training session I had with psychoanalysts of the Kleinian School in London. Mrs. Petroni Angeli was a very senior training analyst, trailing a long black dress like a ball gown, though it was only noon when she received me in her basement consulting room near Bedlam, with no bars on the windows and flowers on the table, and the small gathering of books showed her to be of the Kleinian persuasion. Her receptionist was cold rather than cool, and she left me to wait on a child-sized chair outside the analyst's door. We sat at a table and locked eyes, and for 2 hours arm wrestled my northern working-class mores against her position on the paranoid position in post-Kleinian thought. As we fought, it became clear how well matched we were, but the question of the fee amazed me. "How much will you pay?" And when I answered 40, she asked, "Why?" taking the amount as some index of her worth in my unconscious structures. When I replied, "Less would be an insult, more I cannot afford," she remained baffled and seemed about to faint. "Later," she said at last, shaking her head. When the 2 hours were up, she said nothing in resolution, but that I would be hearing from the director of the institution, and that it would be some time before I did, months rather than weeks, and that was 4 years ago, and I'm still waiting. But I realise the more you know, the less they want you, and I recall another such who ran an evening class and expelled me after a month for arguing too much. None other than the Right Honourable Julia, author of Fantasy in Everyday Life, and daughter-in-law of the Dowager Duchess Hannah, author of the Works of Hannah, and former lady-in-waiting to the late Queen Melanie. My special sin was laughing when Julia said a mother's response to her child's nightmare should be, "Tell them to your analyst." And I just had to resist, and my resistance would be R, the patient's response as part of NTR, the negative therapeutic reaction, and on that score I would remain excluded. Nor were things better on the MA in European Psychoanalysis course at Middlesex. The same thing happened again, the seminars turning into battlegrounds between Burgoyne and me, and he was a Lacanian and I was not, and somehow Winnicott got between us, and not about whether his area of transitional space was the same as the retreat position in Steiner, and my position as an ego-psychologist was insupportable to him, and even more to his deputy, who couldn't stand being beaten in any argument. And when I wrote to 3 classmates in the long vacation, the Brazilian psychiatrist did not reply, nor did the Slade lecturer, nor even the tutor in pastoral counselling. They'd all begged me for book lists and references and suggestions for their essays, and I wondered at my unpopularity, and things were never so bad in poetry. At least some editors took my poems, and one took a whole collection, and I still wondered why my face didn't fit in psychoanalytic circles. And I had first-hand experience of babies, and had written an admittedly unpublished book on creativity in the classroom, and spent 20 years reading everything on the subject the British Library could find me, and I even had an entire run of the International Journal, most of which I'd read. But not even that was enough, and in Harley Street, Ray Shepherd, an editor of Winnicott, gave me 2 hours for free. He was almost my double, and his books were the same as mine, and he said, "It's just a question of brass, lad." But I thought that was only part of it, and I went back to the north, back to the place where the streets had stood when I was born, and I admit I remained puzzled. So I started to write again after 25 years, and took on the new generation poets, who, like the Kleinians, were trying to run the whole show their way, and David Morley, an editor of the New Poetry, invited me to correspond, but when I did, he abruptly ceased writing back, like every jack in office. But that didn't worry me over much. As Brenda said, one day you'll put it in a poem, and so I did, like playing 3-dimensional chess backwards in a mirror maze. And now I'll read a short poem called New Generation Poets. 128 pages of poetry, 20 accessible new poets, mainly blood-axed. So demotic, Demos of the people, sorry. Favoured birthplace, Glasgow or the Bronx, the rise of the working class voice. A working class poet from Leeds in the 60s, I always felt at home in the company I kept. An evening with David Wright, who could be more establishment, set me writing for weeks. The new generation poets gave me a terrible headache, especially Carol Ann Duffy, winning every prize in sight. A kind of Coronation Street composite of microwave dinners and dustbins. My first week in London, a girl on the tube offered me a stick of licorice. She said she was a poet. How do you survive? I asked. How do you think? She answered. At home in Leeds. I can say ta-ra and higher then, with the best of them, and me mam comes naturally to my tongue, as does dies irae di schöne Mullerin, and even ton oinipaponton, Homer's wine dark sea on a good day. It's my home in Leeds 9 and thereabouts, or what's left of it. Most of the roads go nowhere. The bus stop by Bridgewater Place must be the loneliest in Leeds. Where on earth have you been? A London friend asked on the phone. Playing out on the Hollows with Margaret, I answered to her amazement. We play there every day. I suppose our clothes get mucky, but our mams'll not much mind. I even find a new walk by the side of Cook's Moor End Works, a path past an empty factory, by a railway spur unused since before the war. I'm going to go on about the neglect to the council's path preservation officer, who was as mad as me. Imagine getting paid for poetry. This rusting railway's worth a mint in verse. Brilliant yellow chickweed growing through the clinker, real wood sleepers rotted to a turn. I must inform Bradford University's tutor in Yorkshire Transport Archaeology for his conceptual analysis in accepted terminology. The path ends suddenly by Middleton Light Railway, but I don't relish restoration. Give me genuine decay any day. There must have been a god of railways who cares as I do for their rusted railings and spike-topped crossing gates. I'd have a gang of Irish navvies dig out the gates from where they've stuck and haul them across the road to hold the traffic up, while we get up steam in John Blenkinsop. The levers for the points and the great brass wheel beside them have not moved for 50 years. The last time I tried to turn them, I was with Margaret going to Hunslet Feast, and she was 10 and I was 12.